It's my sincere pleasure to have you all here. My name is Brian Henning. I'm professor of philosophy and environmental studies here at Gonzaga, and I have the honor of directing our Gonzaga Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment, the host for our event today. I'd like to recognize that we are on the ancestral lands of the Spokane tribal people, the people of the river. It's always good to remind ourselves that this university wouldn't exist were it not for the fact that we were invited to these lands by those indigenous communities. And we haven't always been the best neighbor. And so one of the things we can do is look for opportunities to center their lives and their legacy in our work. And so the Climate Center seeks to do that in meaningful ways, including by hosting events similar to this one. The Climate Center was founded a couple of years ago. We're relatively young, and we host, as you know, these events all the time, trying to look for opportunities to inform the community's conversations around climate and society and the environment. How many of you have been to one of our events before? I mean, that was a little dangerous to ask. So we host a lot of events this semester. We're going to be hosting three more events. So on Friday, October 27th, Professor Pat Farrow from our mechanical engineering department here at Gonzaga is going to be talking about his research related to hydrogen energy. And so if you're interested in one of those opportunities to talk about and think about that as whether or not that could be a way of addressing our long-term energy needs, that might be a fun talk on Friday, October 27th at noon. Down in the auditorium of Hemmingson Center. Then on November 15th, we'll be continuing a conversation that was really our longest running. We have, as many of you know, the Climate Literacy Project, and some of the fellows are here today. We go into classrooms and deliver climate education lessons directly to students in Spokane Public Schools. We'll be hosting a researcher, Dr. Deb Morrison from the University of Washington, to talk about the future of climate education in the United States. So looking forward to how we might thoughtfully incorporate climate education more fully into K-12 education, K-16 education. So that'll be on November 15th, Wednesday, November 15th, 5 p.m., also in the auditorium. So think about coming to that one. And then finally, our last of this semester will be on the 29th of November after Thanksgiving. We'll be talking about, can we solve the climate crisis and protect wild spaces at the same time? There'll be a panel with Western Environmental Law Center, two attorneys, as well as my colleague, Dr. Greg Gordon. And it kind of relates to the topic, I think, in a way today. So this is maybe a start to a conversation that will continue at the end of the semester. We'll be talking about this challenge of how do we address the climate crisis at scale and at speed by shifting how we create energy and do transportation, while also simultaneously preserving those wild spaces that are left. Can we do that at the same time? And so hopefully some of your questions today will sort of tease some of that out about the challenge to doing that in Washington. So that will be a conversation on Wednesday, November 29th at 6 o'clock, also in the Hemmingson Auditorium. So hope to see you at some of those events. So without any further ado, of course, you're not here to hear me talk. We're here to hear our guest, our honored guest today. As many of you know, Washington State has long been a leader in terms of addressing the climate crisis, both in the state, but just internationally as well. And Commissioner Franz is part of that work. She's led the Department of Natural Resources since 2017, and in that time, the Department of Natural Resources has changed the way it fights wildfires, focused on building community resilience, launched a far-reaching forest health plan, and many more initiatives. Commissioner Franz is committed to ensuring our public lands are healthy and productive and can help us to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis. The Commissioner has also prioritized supporting every community in the state. The lands that she and her office manages generates hundreds of millions of dollars for schools and public services like libraries and hospitals across the state. And in this role, she's allocated millions of dollars to spark economic opportunities in some of the most struggling rural communities in our region, including supporting industries like mass timber, investing in clean energy, and fighting for a strong future for all of our families. Please give a really warm ZAG welcome to the Commissioner Franz.
All right. It's kind of wild to hold a microphone that really isn't projecting, and you sort of feel like it's so Yeah, so it's great to be here. It's just an honor, and it's my first time actually ever speaking at Gonzaga. I've been at a lot of the other major universities and institutions, so it's great to finally be here. I also have to call out, it is great to see so many women's faces in the audience. I will be honest, I got into this role as the Commissioner of Public Lands to find an agency almost about 1,600 people, and only about 20% are women. And so I'm always looking for more women going into the field of environmental science, natural resources, and obviously addressing climate change. So, I thought I'd first sort of talk about the breadth of the work that I am responsible for as Commissioner of Public Lands, because people always even are pretty surprised at the breadth of what we do, because it's not your typical sort of public lands manager like state parks or like our federal agencies. So in my role, I oversee 6 agencies, basically. So first, I oversee 2.6 million acres of aquatic land. So think the entire coast, your Puget Sound, all your rivers, lakes, and streams. And in that, we have a proprietary role where we actually generate revenue from ports, marinas, from shellfish. We're the largest gooey duck producer in the state of Washington. Actually in the United States. It's $30 million. It's China's #1 aphrodisiac. And it's very important for our economy, but also our environment. And the money that we generate goes towards salmon habitat restoration and protection, and everything from the science around ocean acidification and sea level rise and its impacts on our kelp and eelgrass beds to salmon and other types of critical forage fish. I then oversee 3 million acres of uplands. These are lands that are above water, and I don't mean just financially, they are literally above water. And so 2 million acres of forest land. About half of that is set aside in conservation for some of the most ecologically diverse natural areas with unbelievable ecosystem protections. And then the other million generates revenue. It generates revenue for our schools and our counties, basic health, housing, human services, public safety, libraries, teachers. Oversee 1 million acres of agriculture land, which is largely in the southeast part of our state. We're the largest wheat producer in the state. We are becoming one of the largest orchard and vineyard producers. So I don't know how many of you are over 21, but I always say drink more red for public ed. This is really for the children, it's not for yourselves, because it generates a significant amount of funding for our schools. We then have commercial and industrial buildings. So Costco, Safeways, Fred Meyer's, the Edgewater Hotel is ours. And we then also have land right here, in fact, in Spokane, that is residential land. In addition, I oversee second largest amount of recreation land, and we have everything from mountain biking to zip lining to ORV, ATV, and even scuba diving parks. And then I oversee wildfire, which has become almost a 365-day job, and it's in every corner of our state. And then lastly, I always say we are a volatile state, and I don't mean just politically, but we are geologically a very volatile state where we have the threat of 5 volcanoes that are live, and the threat of a big earthquake, tsunamis, and then landslides, which we are not a stranger to in Washington. We do all the data education and studies around that to get information to local, state governments in their planning and their building and also their investments. So in this work, there is not a day that we are not on the front lines of climate change, whether it's the context that we're seeing with increasing wildfires. And I'll start, and I'll go through each kind of the areas of climate change and what we're doing about it. So our state, Central and Eastern Washington, are not strangers to wildfires. After the 2014 through 2016 fires, we had 1 million acres burn in 2015. We lost 3 firefighters' lives. We had over 2,010 fires. And I think people were wondering in Washington whether it was an anomaly or whether it's our new normal. As we roll forward now to 2023, and we've had around 1,884 fires this year, second largest amount in Washington State's history. It is, and about 35% west of the Cascades, it is very clear that wildfire is our new normal. Our seasons are starting as early as March, and they're going well into Thanksgiving week, like last year where we were fighting fires on the coast. How many of you are from Washington? Okay, and how many of you from Eastern Washington? And how many of you from Western Washington? Wow, you stayed home. Your parents are proud. Many of you probably are thought, fires, West Coast, on the beach at Thanksgiving weekend? No way. But yes, we were fighting them every single month. And this year, while we've had the second largest amount of fires, we have changed the way we fight fires so that we can actually reduce the amount of destruction and damage, not only to homes and to communities and our firefighters, but also to our lands. Because as we know, when wildfire hits, it's become our second largest greenhouse gas emission. We also know that it not only is burning all of that carbon in our forests and our landscape into the atmosphere, but it is also burning it at such a high intensity that it is becoming very, very hard for us to actually have it naturally reforest itself, or even us to be able to go in and replant that area so it can. So we have actually changed the way we fight fires, getting on those fires as quickly as possible. We set a goal, 90% of our fires kept to below 10 acres. This year, while we've had second largest amount of fires, and in every corner of the state, we kept 95% of our fires below 10 acres. And it's largely because our forest landscape is so hot and dry with the increasing drought year after year, and with these trees very much stressed without the moisture, without the soil nutrients competing, we're finding that they're very, very weak, which means you have a very high intensity of fuel, and where what might have been fires natural in our landscape, what might have been, 100 years ago, burned only 1,000 acres, will quickly burn 100,000 acres, as we saw in the Labor Day firestorm of 2020. This county obviously got hit very, very hard this year, and we had the most destructive fire with the Oregon Road Fire and the Gray Fire, where 366 homes were destroyed and two people lost their lives. It was one that I think is the biggest wake-up call for Washington State, that our fires are no longer something that is going to happen in a more natural forested landscape or the sage grasslands of Southeast Washington. It is now something that is putting about 2.5 million homes at risk every single year. Our goal is to prevent those fires getting large, because once they get large, they get out of control, and we not only then are destroying the environment, but we are putting our own firefighters and communities at risk. The second area we're seeing significant impacts from climate change is our forest. We, in central and eastern Washington, have roughly 3 million acres of forest that are dead and dying. More than half of that is on federal lands like the Gifford-Pinchot, Okanagan-Wenatchee, the Colville National Forest. We are also seeing the same dying of forests on the west side. And then you have private lands, you have state and tribal lands. We realize that our forests are going to continue to die if we don't go in there and actually reduce the mortality. And that means going in and actually putting in forest thinning, where you're removing the dead, dying disease trees, removing the smaller diameter, so trees are not having to compete so much for the soil nutrients, for the water that is reduced, and for sunlight. Historically, especially in central and eastern Washington, our forests weren't as dense, right? And we're the evergreen state, and what I say, we keep seeing it turn either charcoal black, or we're seeing it turn rust red and brown. I'm sure many of you have seen the forest here, the ponderosa pines that are changing color. That's because they're stressed. And what it means is we've seen in just 3 months, thousands of acres die quickly. And then they're obviously like kindling in the hot, dry summers, and they will burn rapidly. We developed a forest health plan. It's actually the first our state ever did, which was going to actually restore the health of over 1.25 million acres of forest in central and eastern Washington. We started with those forests that were most at risk. And we said we're going to be agnostic to property lines, because disease and insect infestation and drought don't track property lines. They're not looking at, I'll just go after federal lands, or I'll just go after private lands. They go and they move through the jurisdiction just like wildfire does. So we took a watershed approach, where we actually identified the highest risk watersheds based on the forest mortality and spread of disease and insect, and we mapped them and did an assessment of what did that forest used to look like hundreds of years ago, before humans were really interacting with that forest, and what are those forests likely to look like 100 years from now, given climate change. So we could actually start to develop a forest health plan for each one of those watersheds. We have some of the most preeminent scientists. Derek Churchill is just like, to me, he's like my idol. When I grow up, I want to be like him, because he is able to assess these forests and do it with a real understanding of history and that landscape, but also looking forward at the challenges landscape's going to have with climate change. We then go and do that work on the land, and this year we'll be 6 years into that plan, and we will be halfway to our goal, having completed 500,000 acres. And the goal is, frankly, we have to work at the pace and scale of wildfire because it is becoming so destructive year after year. So we doubled down and said we're going to try to reach our 20-year goal in 10 years, and we're on pace to do that on federal, state, private, and tribal land. We're now developing a West Side Forest Health Plan because we're seeing that significant challenge. Now in climate, our forests are not just stressed by drought and disease and insect and increasing wildfires. They're also actually being impacted by humans. For us, our forests are probably our most significant carbon sink that we could use to be able to reduce the chances of greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the impact of climate change. But we're the evergreen state. Washington State is known, it's our identity for its forest. And over the last 20 years, we've lost 400,000 acres of forest. 400,000 acres, and we're on pace and scale to lose another 600,000 acres in the next 20 years, which I would actually say that number is probably going to be even more increased because with COVID, people found out they can live and work anywhere. They can, right? Go to school anywhere, work anywhere, and people are wanting to live in the forest more. So we're seeing actually that conversion of forest, whether it's to housing developments or shopping malls, at a pace and scale that is not only harming our environment, well, it's harming in two ways. One, you have more greenhouse gas emissions as people are now having to move back and forth to get to their shopping, to get to their school, and to get to their jobs. They're also converting that forest that was that great carbon sink, our best carbon sink. So we're trying to put a stake in the ground. We've identified those forests that are at the highest risk of conversion based on growth and where people are moving to and living, and working now to actually invest in buying more of that forest land to bring into our portfolio, because when it's public, then you're less likely to have it be converted versus it being private land. Our hope this year is we're going to be, through federal money and state money, that we're going to be ideally bringing in over 40,000 more acres into conservation, into forest land, with the goal that we'll keep on doing that year after year. Now, one of the things that I love about, I could talk about forests forever, but one of the things I love about forests too is oftentimes when we're looking at these forests and we're just trying to prevent them to burn, we don't realize that they also have an ability to create the most sustainable building product out there, right? When a tree is cut, when is turned into a wood product, it stores that carbon in it versus a concrete or steel building. And when we look at our forest health work, we're taking smaller diameter trees. They didn't grow up to the full because we're trying to thin that forest out so they're not all competing. The beauty is, and that's where I was this morning, we now have building products, new technologies that's taking smaller diameter trees that otherwise, and even dead, dying, diseased trees, even burned trees after a fire, and turning it into an actual wood product that we are now able to build at a more efficient and affordable and more environmentally sustainable way into our schools, into our apartment buildings, into commercial buildings. Mercer, if you ever get a chance, you should go try to get a tour. It's right in your backyard, which is taking that smaller diameter trees, those thinnings, and turning it into a wood product. We also have a new facility that is going to be opening up in the next 2 years that takes biochar. And this thing, just biochar, I could talk about forever because it gets me so excited. Right now, when our forests are burning, either because we didn't do the treatment, or when we've done the treatment, we're oftentimes left with slash piles, large slash piles that haven't been able to be turned into a product, and we burn in the atmosphere so that nature doesn't get there first, and now we have a massive bonfire that's damaging. The beauty is we're able to now, with biochar coming online and a major investment happening up in Kettle Falls, we will be able to get rid of that waste material instead of it burning into the atmosphere. They will now then take it into their facility. They're able, Avista's buying the gas, it'll power 13,500 homes a year with renewable energy. The product now has been burned at such a high level that it actually will cement or store that carbon for hundreds of years, and we are then going to put it on our agricultural lands, which will help us, one, have a less need of water as we see increasing drought, but we also have the critical need of feeding more people in our population. It also helps us bring more carbon-rich, nutrient-rich into our soil so they can continue to be productive. And in fact, we're finding we don't need as much fertilizers or other types, our farmers, on that if they have biochar. In addition, we have been working to actually focus on our other forests, which is our submerged forests. These are the forests, our kelp and eelgrass meadows, right? many people don't see these and don't understand how much value are. First, they store an enormous amount of carbon, but they are also the critical habitat for our salmonids as well as forage fish. The problem is we've lost 60% of our submerged forests in all of the Puget Sound. In parts of the Puget Sound where the capital is, we've lost 80% of these forests. And it is very complicated, but we have worked to now set a goal that we're going to restore 10,000 acres of our kelp and eelgrass meadows. I've created the first ever actual kelp eelgrass protection zone in our waters. And we're learning about the science, about what really works, because there's a lot unknown about the reforestation of kelp and eelgrass, which is not necessarily the case with our forest lands. We're also working to actually increase the number of acres of forest that we are replanting, because we have lost either through burns or through fallow lands where people didn't replant, so that we can actually rapidly scale up the amount of forest land. I have to also identify the urban area, because we oftentimes think about climate change, but people may have heard a number of stories around the heat that we are experiencing. Heat has become our nation's #1 deadliest weather disasters. Not hurricanes, not tsunamis, not wildfires, it's heat. We saw that in Texas. We saw it even in our own state just back in 2020 when we had the heat dome, took 120 people's lives, which most people, when they think about Washington State, and I grew up in the Northwest, would never think that heat would actually get so intense. We believe we have a role and responsibility in addressing that, and especially because it plays out in true inequities, where in many communities of our state, in fact, Seattle, where I live, you can have a 13-degree difference between a community of color, low-income community, and one that's a wealthy white community. And you think about 13 degrees, and you think about 90-degree temperatures versus 113-degree temperatures or 110, it's a huge inequity that needs to be addressed. We've launched first ever tree equity, where we are working to be the first state in the nation to have true tree equity score of over 85. And this is a whole data analysis. It's pretty geeky but exciting, where we will identify every neighborhood and what their tree equity score is. And then those that are below 85, we will work tirelessly to be able to plant new trees in those areas to actually help cool the environment, also bring nature into that environment, because they oftentimes are concrete jungles, but also it actually reduces their cost and energy when you think about air conditioning or other. It also addresses actually storing water so it's not running off and polluting our streams and our rivers. Okay, last one, and then I'll just turn over. One of the other exciting areas, we obviously are rapidly accelerating clean energy. We have 3 of the largest solar farms that are on our land. We actually make money for our schools on that land, but we also have wind. I want to listen to this hydrogen presentation, because I am hearing a lot around hydrogen and very interested in what that looks like as we try to really increase the amount of renewable energy we have to keep up with demand right now, but as we electrify our transportation grid and start to get more and more everything from commercial and industrial vehicles to our own personal vehicles, it's going to mean an enormous amount of investment in clean energy. The last thing I'll say, which is really exciting, is we have basalt rocks, some of the most amazing basalt rocks, and we now have companies that are interested in leasing those rocks, where they will actually pump carbon out of the atmosphere into our rocks and solidifies into that rock, and they can store it for hundreds of years. Rocks that I couldn't make any money off of, right? Rocks that I didn't necessarily see as valuable for climate versus just the context of beauty and obviously our geological wonders, is now becoming an unbelievable, exciting solution. And very few states have the kind of basalt rock we have that is capable of doing this. So this is starting to come online, and I'm super excited about it. And maybe one of those 5 live volcanoes could actually also be helpful when it comes to like geothermal heat. So we can sort of channel that intensity of those volcanoes into something that can also power our homes and our vehicles and our towns and our communities. You can see I could go on forever, but I just want to say there's an enormous amount of work that's happening in the ability to reduce our climate impacts, to be able to set Washington State up to be a leader in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We also have developed a climate resilience plan, because you can't just be responding to try to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. You also have to, as you can see, every community is being impacted by climate change, and we should be at the same time investing in the resiliency of our communities, our lands, and our waters.
Thank you so much. There's a lot to dig into. So we've got a good bit of time. So we've got our first question from Jordan Kremer. Jordan, would you like to start us off?
Can you say where you're from, too?
Yes, hi.
Okay.
I'm Jordan. I stand up? Oh, yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm Jordan. I'm from San Diego.
Oh,
and
lovely.
I am an environmental science major here. And coming from San Diego, I've always had access to beaches and other public natural areas for my own benefit, whether recreation, education, that kind of thing. So my question for you is, how do you go about finding the balance between using public lands or recreational lands for those purposes, for economic purposes, all while preserving them for future use and for the habitats they encompass for those benefits as well?
So, and you can sit down. You don't have to stand up the whole time. So, this is one of the biggest interesting challenges we have, right? So, first of all, the way we manage our 6 million acres of land is when it comes to the protection for the environment, we know that those lands are never going to, if we don't protect them and keep them healthy for our environment, then they're not going to be healthy for our communities. And they're also not going to be healthy, desirable places to recreate, right? And so we always see a multi-benefit approach to it, right? So first of all, we look for recreation opportunities on every single part of our lands, whether it's aquatic lands, agricultural lands, or our forest lands. It's important that you realize that as we've seen more and more people using our lands for recreation, which we all want, we want people out there enjoying it because it helps their mental, emotional, and physical health. It also gets everyone actually invested in protecting these beautiful sacred places. We are seeing that with COVID, as more and more people were going out and using them, we also saw far more abuse. We launched a project called Recreate Responsibly with REI that took off nationally. We didn't realize, but it was great, about actually educating people how to be in nature, how to be on these public lands and do it safely for themselves, but also in a caring manner. We are seeing more and more, though, conflict. And that conflict is actually with our tribes and their treaty rights, because they use these lands since time immemorial for cultural resources, whether it's hunting and gathering, whether it's spiritual bathing. They also have archaeological resources there. And right now we're launching first ever recreation plan for our entire state on our lands and waters that will help really develop a strategy for recreation that is respectful to our cultural and archaeological treaty rights with our tribes, but also being able to make sure people have a way to recreate safely. I think your question also had an economic context in there, and I don't know if there's going to be other questions. I was trying to make sure I hit the public lands and recreation piece, but okay. I'm sure I'm going to get a question like it.
Our next question is from Madeline. Are you Madeline?
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a senior environmental studies and political science student, and I'm from Colorado.
Oh, yay, Colorado. I'm in competition with Colorado on recreation. We should be the winning state, and they're winning. Yeah, I know. They've done a beautiful job of planning that everybody could get out to recreate literally from their front door, right? And that's one of my visions, is to be able to do that kind of regional planning so people could just walk out the door and they could get there within a very short distance to whatever recreation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With my double major, I really see the connection between between politics and the environment, and you kind of stand right at the crux.
Sort of in the blades.
So you already kind of touched on some of the tangible action that the DNR is taking in order to mitigate climate change, but how do you collaborate with the legislature and other agencies to make those changes?
Yeah, great question. I'm a big believer that our legislators are an extension of our communities, right? They're the ones that listen to you all year long, and then they take what they heard from you, what your challenges, what your issues are in the environment, economy, or in social services, and take it to Olympia and then fight for that, right? And the first thing I did is realize that I'm a statewide elected, right? And I have 6 million acres of land to manage that is in every county of a state, and everybody has an opinion on it, right? And I've got, almost 8 million voters, or not voters, but 8 million people who all have an opinion on it, and I can't meet with every one of them. And the legislator from every county, whether, whether they're from my party or another party, or whether they're from my side of the state or their side of the state, is actually an extension of the voice in that community. So the first thing I did was actually go out and listen. I went and met with all of them in their community and said, help me understand your community. What is your greatest challenges and struggles when it comes to wildfires, when it comes to our forests and management of our forests, and when it comes to our waters, when it comes to housing even, because we're now doing housing on our lands. Help me understand that, and then be directly responsive so they can just call me up and go, I have a problem. But also so when I got to Olympia, that I could work more closely with them to make sure I was meeting their needs on the lands and waters in their community, but also on the risks that they're facing, like wildfire. The second thing is, and I think actually this is a really important message for all of you. I have 3 boys, they're 18, 20, and 25. And I grew up in City Hall, actually. I grew up, my father's a single parent, and I grew up immersed in politics and policy, and that's where I fell in love with public service. At the time, you could allow a 6-year-old to walk into a city council and not be worried about whether they were going to be faced with divisiveness and derision and insult and attack, right? You knew that there would be a healthy debate, which is what is healthy for our democracy, and there'd be civic engagement in that. There'd be listening and learning and coming together. And unfortunately, I think what is playing out, and it's playing out not just in the state, and it's not just playing on both sides of the Cascades, but it's playing out nationally, is that we've really moved to contempt in our politics, where we are no longer attacking problems together, right? But we're attacking people. And when we do that, we've moved away from actually serving our people and serving in getting good ideas and innovation on the ground. So what I have tried to do is actually make sure that every bill I run is bipartisan. Bipartisan. I try to also make sure that every bill has represented from the east side and central side of the state and the west side, because then it's reflective of our geographies, and it's reflective of our parties, it's reflective of our landscapes, but also the community needs. I will tell you, it is incredibly hard to do that. Where some people could love the bill. If I said 2 Republicans are bringing this bill forward, it's amazing, right? And I took it to the Republicans, they're like, I love it too. Right? If I did the same thing, 2 Democrats are bringing this bill forward, and the Democrats, I love it too. But when I say I got a Republican and I got a Democrat, I lose a number of people, right? Because then we're no longer standing up for whether it was good policy, right? We're now more about who brought it forward, and can I trust you because you decide to work with somebody on the other side. I believe this state will rise or fall based on how we come together, or based on if we pull ourselves apart. And I'm a big believer that we need to, every single person, and it starts with each and every one of you, because your futures are on the line. The more difficult it is for us to pass good policy that isn't reflective of our communities and all of our communities, the more we are gonna fall short and just kick the can down the road. That we need everybody to do what our firefighters do, which is they, every single day, are putting their lives on the line. And they go out and they don't say, Republican home, yeah, not gonna do it, or Democrat, oh, no, oh, rich, poor, black, brown, or white. No, they run to fire to save the person's life, because that is the morally responsible thing to do. That is the caring thing to do. And we have a motto, all lands, all hands, all together. And every policy we are moving in the state should have the same frame. All lands, all hands, all together, we are gonna rise.
Thanks for that question, Maddie. That was a good one. Next is from Olivia.
Hi there, I'm Olivia. I'm from a rural town 45 minutes outside of Boise, Idaho, and I'm a research biology and environmental studies student. The past few summers I've worked in Montana and Idaho on natural resource and land management as a biological aid and as a wilderness ranger. And I've personally witnessed a lot of conflicts between residents, indigenous groups, and government agencies in terms of management decisions. So my question for you is, what is the biggest challenge Washington's public lands face in the threat of climate change, and what issues do you see from local stakeholders, including those in government positions, as well as from residents and indigenous groups?
Yeah. Well, say the last part of your question again. I was so focused on your history. Yeah.
Just like, what conflicts do you see between government, indigenous groups, and like local community members in terms of making management decisions in Washington?
Yeah. I mean, so I talked a bit about what the greatest threat to our lands and waters are just in my presentation around climate change. I want to focus more on your background, right? And where you come from, rural communities. Because I do think this is part of what's become our most significant challenge. So I'm just going to give a grounding for you all. So in my responsibility of managing our lands, our forest, agriculture, commercial, industrial, and even residential lands, I manage those with a fiduciary responsibility, where we generate for K through 12, community college, University of Washington, Wazoo, Gonzaga's not on the list, sorry, right? And then I manage also for 39 counties. So every county, when the economic downturn happened and people couldn't pay their taxes, whether it's like the Depression or different points in time, land was turned over to the county, and then found themselves at different bad periods of economic downturn with a lot of land that they couldn't manage, okay? They saw that the Department of Natural Resources was managing it from statehood for our schools, and they said, could you manage it too? And made sense, more efficiency. We have the resources and tools. Now roll forward to the spotted owl. And the spotted owl was, we signed one of the largest habitat conservation plans in the entire country. It protects 90 species. It is, frankly, phenomenal in a commitment to our endangered fish and wildlife that we know it's getting harder and harder for us to protect. Now, at the time that law came down, it took, in some cases, counties where King County is our most populated county, right? It has a very diverse economic basis where Seattle is. We're 0.08% of their operating budget. So if you think we're 0.08, if we went away tomorrow, they wouldn't even really know. But in many of those counties that the HCP truly impacted by removing enormous amounts of land out of their funding base, it went from 80% of their operating budget. 80%. That's teachers, that's libraries, that's fire, that's police, that's health, housing, human services, everything your government provides, especially to those who are most vulnerable, right? It went from 80% to 40% overnight. No backfill. You probably have heard the term just transition, right? You might have heard we had a coal facility in Southwest Washington, and the context was shutting it down. Coal is bad, fossil fuel that harms our environment. But when they did that, they knew it was going to take time to move out of that production, and they knew people who worked there were going to be impacted. So they did what's called just transition. We're going to help train them for new jobs. We're going to help put them to work in other areas so that there wasn't this immediate loss. We didn't do that. And as a result now, and one of my stories I heard was a friend of mine now, but I met him when I was first in this office, who was a 6th grader at the time that decision came down. And he literally the next day knew whose parents had jobs and whose didn't. And he watched over the year the decline in his childhood friend that he'd grown up with, where he saw more abuse at home, saw substance abuse, where parents were numbing their pain and their loss of dignity, not having a job and trying to keep a roof over their head, to actually the kids numbing their pain, right? To then dropping out of school, right? It had enormous impact in gutting those communities. And you can go there today, whether it's Aberdeen or Republic or Port Angeles, and you will still see the impacts of that decision from 30 plus years ago. We are in that place right now with climate change where there is a similar movement. And we have to learn from the past that you can't just take care of place and ignore the people, and you can't just take care of people and ignore the place. You have to take care of both. And that means in our decision making, we have to be sitting with the people whose jobs are going to be impacted, who the revenue or funding that goes to their counties and provides those basic services that their community desperately needs and needs more than ever with a mental health and a housing crisis, right? To say, how do we invest in you? And then I also think that we can't have a righteousness. We bring too often a righteousness to this issue where our rural communities right now are literally the communities that are, one, producing the wood we all depend on for our schools, our hospitals, and our homes. And we need more homes, as we see with the housing crisis. They're also the community that is generating our energy, whether it's in biomass or the biochar I talked about, or whether it's wind and solar. They're not in the central part, high populated cities. They're also providing the water. The city of Seattle, their water doesn't come from Seattle. It comes from far away in a rural community, and they're providing the food. So rural producers are truly supporting urban consumers, but the two aren't actually meeting and connecting to say, how my success is dependent on your success. If rural communities don't have the ability to grow that product and sell it, they won't have jobs, they won't have stability. And vice versa, if urban communities don't have the ability to have the wood product and the energy and the water and the food, they won't have stability. We have got to start building a partnership, and it's how our leaders show up, by saying, I'm not here to judge, I'm here to learn, listen, and I'm here to actually make sure all of our communities are not just surviving barely, but actually thriving.
Thank you for that question, Olivia. Is Madeline Durr here with us? Madeline.
Hello, I'm Madeline. I originally grew up in central Minnesota, so I have had a lot of experience being outdoors with different sort of habitats. For example, like the lakes, the north forest, and the prairie fields of southern Minnesota. I'm a environmental studies and communications student here, and my question is, how has the state of Washington tried to prevent more biodiversity loss, and are there any policies that are in place to restore habitat loss?
Yeah, great question. So I love that you said biodiversity, because oftentimes right now there's so much focus out there, climate change, carbon this, carbon that, when actually we really should be focused on biodiversity, because our biodiversity is being lost at an unbelievable pace and scale across the entire world, right? Through deforestation and conversion of those lands to other uses. And once you lose that biodiversity, you can't really get it back again. And if anything you do for biodiversity is going to have a great benefit for climate and reducing carbon emissions. The way we manage our forests actually is, first, we have 2 million acres of forests, and 1 million acres we've already set aside in conservation, pure conservation. So that is some of the highest value providing, critical biodiversity. On the other 1 million acres, we actually have put in place, there's lots of certifications, but FSC sort of has these significant sort of criteria that we grow our trees longer. We create different species of trees we're planting, so it's not monoculture. We have different species, we have different ages of those trees. We have stricter buffers and on our riparian areas, as well as our geologically hazardous areas, so that we are looking at it from a biodiversity area. And then when we are harvesting on that 1 million acres, we harvest with a much lighter touch, where and for every tree we cut down, which goes into our built environment, it's more local, so it's the greenhouse gas emissions and stronger protection, so you're not getting them from South America or other places that don't have as much protection. We plant 3 trees for it. In addition, what we've been trying to do, is I was talking, is it's my Keep Washington Evergreen initiative, which is sort of, one, let's not let it burn down and turn into charcoal, but let's also not it become homes and paved shopping malls and others, is actually trying to buy more of this forest land that's at threat of conversion. A lot of the people that own, our small forest landowners that own a lot of these forests are aging out. They're nearing retirement. Their children don't necessarily want to take that on. So we have unbelievable threat of conversion, and the value of that property is significant for a homeowner, and they might want to buy it, or a developer. We need to now value it for its biodiversity. So we've been trying to secure more money. One, we're removing land in our portfolio that isn't as high a value, and we're to buy more of that. We're also have used the Climate Commitment Act, where we're securing more investments than ever before. And thankfully, the federal government has stepped up with the Inflation Reduction Act and a number of legislation that more investments than ever before are coming into actually purchasing forest land or natural areas. The second thing I want to say is we're actually moving into regenerative ag, and we're looking to actually, those 1 million acres of land, bring the same kind of climate smart that we do to forestry to our agriculture, and the same with our biodiversity. And check out our natural areas program too, because it's an area where people don't really know, but we have 2 laws that help us protect those that have species of plant or wildlife you can't find anywhere in the world, are kind of hotspots for us to protect.
This has been really, really interesting. There's so much to talk about. We were riding up in the elevator up here, and you're like, I would love to teach a class. So Dr. Gordon, Commissioner Franz would like to teach a class for you in the Environmental Studies and Sciences Department. So
You can grade me for how bad I do, you know?
I think it'll be really fun. Let's thank Commissioner Franz for being here with us today.
Thank you, guys. Great questions.
If you have a minute, we would love to take a quick photo with you. So if you would like students to take a group photo, Jordan and Grace, would you mind helping me move the podium just off to the side? And we'll just do it right here. So anybody who would like to be in the photo, just come up front.
Thank you, guys. Oh, whoa, that comes apart.
Tilt that way. You got it?
Don't worry. I'll grab that. You want help? You got it. Okay. Yes. I have a couple.
Thank you, ladies.
I think that was going to come apart.
I know.